from majestic peaks and deep valleys, whose true beauty is only visible from high above. To the heart of Austria, where the craggy, imposing landscape is home to rare small creatures and great forces of nature. A journey through a world of diversity and contrasts, to seemingly endless lowlands that provide locals and long-distance travelers with rest and refuge. Into mysterious forests, home to tiny but devastating insects and their natural enemies. Deep into an intact, almost exotic river landscape, where rare species survive and once eradicated species were reintroduced. And finally, to a border region where armored adversaries do battle in a world defined by the glorious hues of nature. The magic of Austria's 6 national parks lies in the diverse habitats they protect. They are both a warning and an incentive to protect the country's wild heritage and to meet the challenges of the future head on. Over thousands of years, flora and fauna that originated in the cold steppes of Central Asia, the Arctic, and in southern Europe have settled here, in Austria's highest mountains. It is one of the largest conservation areas in Central Europe, and Austria's largest national park, Hohe Tauern. The national park's territory includes 3 of Austria's most distinctive mountain ranges, the Venediger, Ankogel, and Glockner groups. The golden eagle is considered one of the most accomplished hunters among these peaks. Here, a lack of caution can prove fatal. The eagle dives just above the ground, its prey always in sight. Its eyes and its claws rarely miss their target. From Austria's oldest national park in the west to the youngest at the heart of the country. Over thousands of years, the Enns River has carved a vast, impressive gorge through the eastern Alps. Surrounded by steep, rocky slopes lies the Gesäuse National Park. In winter, these slopes are often subjected to the full force of nature. However, avalanches are not only destructive. The tracks change year by year, creating different ecological niches. The pioneer plants that bring life back to the devastated land are soon followed by butterflies, like the Apollo. This endangered butterfly species requires very specific conditions to thrive and feels right at home in the stony surroundings. As does this jumping spider. At the moment, however, the spider seems less interested in its environment than in its mate. One of the most important pioneer plants in this avalanche track is the so-called orpin, providing sustenance for both Apollo and checkered blue butterflies. Finally, the jumping spider's intended mate responds to her suitor's efforts. National Park employee Martin Hartmann closely observes the many changes that take place following avalanches.
One fascinating aspect about this location is that avalanches, rock slides, and even a single falling rock can create a varied, diverse habitat, a mosaic of different living spaces with dead wood and different features. Here, in particular, the area faces south, so it is a small island of warmth. In addition, a wide range of species are found here. Avalanches carry plants from high up in the subalpine zone of the mountains all the way down to the banks of the Enns River. Taken together, these various factors result in very high species diversity.
One number in particular sums up this incredible diversity. On this slope alone, more than 700 different butterfly species have been recorded in recent years. Water has a dramatic impact on the Gesäuse National Park all year round. Many of the watercourses here are completely unregulated. On warm, humid summer days, an unusual creature can be found along the banks of these streams and rivers, the alpine salamander. The salamanders are attracted by the juicy earthworms that emerge from their hiding places after rain. Some of the worms are larger than the amphibians that prey on them. Once the alpine salamander has eaten its fill, it withdraws into a fissure or under a rock to wait for the next rains. When night falls and the moon sinks below the horizon, a spectacular sight appears in the heavens. It has been established that the Gesäuse has the darkest sky in Austria, and the Milky Way unfurls above the landscape. Stars that are light years from Earth, then seem just a heartbeat away. One of the last remaining breeding grounds for common sandpipers is found along the Enns River. These waders have become rare, and even when they are seen, they do their best to remain unnoticed. Just 4 to 6 breeding pairs inhabit the national park each year, a quarter of all the sandpipers in the state of Styria. Predators can pose a risk, but perhaps the greatest threat to the eggs and the flightless young birds is flooding. Outside the national park, the destruction of its riverside habitats is making life for the common sandpiper increasingly difficult. The regulation of watercourses and construction along rivers and streams deprive the shy birds of the gravel banks and natural areas they need to survive. "150 kilometers to the east lies the second largest reed bed in Europe after the Danube Delta. It is located in the Neusiedlersee Seewinkel National Park. This reed bed is a truly unique habitat. The Eurasian penduline tit has established its nest high above the area cleared by the grazing donkeys. In fact, the male bird has begun building several potential homes. Its mate now chooses its favorite, then helps to complete the future nest. There is a lot to do, and sometimes it is all just too much. Finally, everything is just the way she wants it, and it's time to consummate the relationship. Near the penduline tit nest, all is calm. Or is it? There are now 5 hungry mouths to feed. Penduline tit parents will occasionally share the responsibility of rearing the chicks, but more often than not, the male has already moved on. This is only possible because the penduline tit nests are well insulated, ensuring that the chicks grow up in warm, comfortable surroundings. Nonetheless, the female has a lot of work to do. She has to feed her young offspring and remove their waste from the nest. In autumn, the Neusiedlersee Seewinkel National Park is particularly attractive and busy. It is now a transport hub and a resting place for thousands and thousands of birds on their way to their winter quarters. Around Halloween, the haunting calls of the cranes echo through the landscape as they settle among the ducks and geese to take a short break from their long journey to Africa. After a few days of rest, the birds suddenly take off together and continue their travels as though obeying some secret command. When the sun rises above the horizon and the morning mists evaporate, the full glory of the Kalkalpen National Park is revealed. Four-fifths of the park's surface area is covered in forest. This poses a number of challenges for the management of the national park. One of these challenges is just 6 millimeters long. The bark beetle, or more precisely, the European spruce bark beetle. Despite its diminutive size, this beetle does significant damage to spruce trees. It tunnels into the bark, then lays its eggs. These develop into larvae that carve tunnels throughout the trunk before pupation, thereby weakening the tree. In warm, dry years, up to 3 generations of bark beetle may appear. Then, the tree's natural defense mechanisms begin to fail. Once nutrient and water delivery systems in the tree are interrupted, it begins to die off and eventually falls. Fortunately, the forest has allies to defend it, like the ant beetle. During the hunt, speed is of the essence. But sometimes, even the fastest ant beetle is too slow. Jan Kerbel of the Austrian Federal Forests is one of the people tasked with managing the bark beetles in the national park.
Bark beetles are a normal part of a forest ecosystem. We allow them to develop naturally at the heart of the national park, but we do have to take measures against them around the edges to prevent them spreading to cultivated forests. Open spaces are now increasingly home to beech, larch and fir trees. It was fascinating to see how quickly cultivated forest can become wilderness again.
The European spruce bark beetle is in fact an integral part of a forest ecosystem, but can become a problem in cultivated spruce monocultures. The bark beetle larvae also provide food for other forest inhabitants, like the Eurasian three-toed woodpecker. In spring, both male and female woodpeckers spend much of their time stuffing their offspring's beaks with unfortunate bark beetle larvae. This also helps to prevent the bark beetles spreading too rapidly. Christian Fuchsjäger is the national park's resident lynx expert. He regularly checks camera traps set up at neuralgic points around the park to determine whether lynxes roam the area. This camera has been aimed at a stone where scent markings have been known to appear. The camera has indeed captured a lynx. Now, Fuchsjäger has to collect fur samples for examination. This is the only way to conclusively determine the sex of the animal. The national park ranger installs some small brushes. The lynxes rub against the bristles and leave clumps of hair behind. The rock face proves to be the ideal location for the camera trap and the brushes. The scent not only attracts lynxes, a badger comes by to investigate, followed by a marten, and finally, a raccoon, which uses the stone and the nearby brushes for a spot of exercise. The Kalkalpen National Park is also home to spectacular karst springs. Two of these, the Teufelskirche or Devil's Church, and the Goldloch or Golden Hole, once caused confusion amongst our ancestors, who could not understand why water levels in the surrounding gorges rose and fell within the space of just a few hours. The answer lies in the name of the national park, Kalkalpen, or Limestone Alps. The mountains are formed from soluble limestone and are riddled with tunnels that carry water into the ravines at a rapid pace. Every day, this water dissolves tons of limestone. The limestone Alps will eventually vanish altogether in a few million years. New guests have recently arrived in the national park. In places where the streams widen and the water flows more sedately, common mergansers. Just a few days after hatching, the young birds are already on the hunt for fish. Once the chick finally catches a fish, it faces a new challenge: how to protect its bounty from its siblings. Day by day, the confidence and skill of the young mergansers increases. After extensive diving practice, it's time for a little grooming on dry land. The many different ecosystems throughout Austria are connected in myriads of ways. The limestone that is washed out of the Kalkalpen region will eventually end up in the Donauauen National Park. The park begins in the east of Austria's capital city, Vienna. Like the ibex in the Hohe Tauern National Park, beavers were an integral part of nature here until around 150 years ago. Then they were eradicated, hunted for their fur and for the castoreum they produce, which was said to increase potency. Beginning in 1976, biologists joined forces with the city of Vienna to reintroduce around 50 of the large rodents to the Danube floodplains. These efforts were successful, and the beavers have now returned to the Donauauen National Park in force. Like beavers, European pond turtles were often eaten during periods of religious fasting. These days, they are endangered as a result of the ongoing destruction of their natural habitats. Fortunately, conditions in the Donauauen National Park are ideal for the freshwater turtles. European pond turtles mate in spring, shortly after a period of brumation, a state similar to hibernation. The males drive the females into the water, then clamber onto their shells and hold on tight. The eyes may be the window to the soul, but they are also the easiest way to tell males and females apart. Males have orange irises, while those of the females are yellow. And the turtles are not the only animals who reproduce at this time of year. Nearby in the large meadows, the national park's most toxic inhabitant is also on a mission to mate. The oil beetle. Oil beetles are also known as blister beetles, as they secrete a reddish-orange blistering agent from their knee joints when threatened. Apparently, Giacomo Casanova used the poison as an aphrodisiac. These insects are extremely complex and also fascinating. Thousands of tiny orange larvae with 3 claws emerge soon after the eggs are laid and immediately climb the next available plant. Each larva has a single goal: to attract a solitary bee and attach itself, hitching a ride to the bee's nest. Unfortunately, however, the larvae will attach themselves to practically any insect or spider leg, and few therefore survive. In this case, the beetle larva has found a bee fly rather than a bee. If the larvae realize that they have clambered up a blade of grass rather than a flowering plant, they attempt to trick bees into believing they are a blossom. Finally, a solitary bee settles on a flower covered in oil beetle larvae. It is powerless in the face of overwhelming odds. The larvae are carried to the bee's nest, where they consume all the stored pollen before moving on to the bee larvae. Christian Deary, a National Park staff member, has observed a worrying development in the Danube floodplains in recent years. In spring, an apparently harmless plant appears all over the national park. Small, yellowish bundles of male blossoms hang attractively from the branches of this maple species. But the box elder poses a danger to biodiversity here.
The box elder was introduced here along with many other North American plants. In North America, it only grows on floodplains, while in Austria, the ruderal plant also thrives on gravel. In fact, the box elder grows so quickly here that it displaces native plants. Of course, we want our native plants to survive, particularly in the national parks. When neophytes like this are introduced to a particular region, the animals that would normally consume them do not travel along. Naturally, the local animals need time to adapt to the presence of these new plants. Some, like the box elder, have bitter-tasting bark that does not appeal to the native fauna. However, we have noticed that over time, animals do actually adapt to the new arrivals. Here, the beavers have now started felling the box elders and consuming the bark.
Shaped by the beavers, the floodplain landscape is the perfect habitat for the freshly hatched European pond turtles. Getting there may be something of an adventure, but it's worth it. The water in an old branch of the Danube provides the young turtles with security from most potential predators. mysterious fairy tale forests of the Tayatal National Park. Here, the Taya River that forms the border between Austria and the Czech Republic has carved a deep channel into the Bohemian Massif. On the Czech side, the ruins of Nový Hradec Castle tower above the river. The area continues to host battles between heavily armored knights who fight for the attentions of potential partners, as they did in the days of yore. The weapons may look fearsome, but the intention is not to harm the opponent. In fact, the point of the contest is merely to knock the adversary off a branch. Nearby, a spectator watches the competition with interest. Like an ancient dragon, only smaller, a green lizard soaks up the sun on a rock. Once the lizard's blood has warmed up sufficiently, it becomes an extremely efficient hunter. The grasshopper is far easier to catch than the more resilient stag beetles. The victorious male has earned the right to mate and to pass on its genes to future stag beetle generations. From the towering, craggy, rocky outcrops to the cool shade of the valley floor. Here, the Kajabach stream flows into the Taya River. At first glance, the stream seems somewhat insignificant, but it is home to an animal that has become rare in Austria, the European or noble crayfish. This crayfish has become an unfortunate victim of its American relatives. Signal and spiny-cheeked crayfish that were introduced into native waters brought the crayfish plague with them. The invasive species are immune to the effects of the fungal disease they spread, but it is fatal to native crayfish. If they are able to avoid the crayfish plague, and conditions are ideal, these animals can live for years. The ecosystem in and around the Kajabach stream remains both healthy and stable. The same cannot be said of the Taya River. The catchment area expands outwards to include agricultural land, just one of the many issues here. The local brown trout have taken to the new spawning grounds well. Females burrow into the loose gravel, creating shallow pits for their eggs. Once the spawning pit is complete, a male arrives to fertilize the eggs. Female brown trout can lay up to 1,500 eggs in a series of different pits on the riverbed. In the Kaibach stream, the European crayfish are thriving. They mated in autumn, when water temperatures dropped, and have survived the winter. Small white worms are visible towards the rear of the female's torso. These leech-like clitollates are not parasites, but rather help to cleanse the crayfish. A female tries to keep her eggs clean as the time for them to hatch approaches. This female's eggs have already hatched. The tiny crayfish spend several days clinging to their mother until her yolk sac is completely empty. Then they strike out on their own to look for food. From Austria's smallest national park, we return once more to the largest and oldest, the Hohe Tauern National Park. With its 3,000-meter-high peaks, thunderous waterfalls, and valleys shaped by glaciers. The national park was also the site of another successful conservation effort, the reintroduction of bearded vultures. In the 19th century, Europe's largest bird fell victim to its ill-deserved reputation for killing lambs and stealing children. In fact, bearded vultures are scavengers rather than hunters, but the damage was done. The last bearded vulture in the Alps is presumed to have been killed in 1913. The fact that they have now returned to the Alps is due to a comprehensive breeding program. More than 200 young vultures have been released throughout the region in the last 40 years. The large birds are essentially an alpine waste disposal service. They are at the very end of the food chain and specialists at removing scraps and bones, erasing the last traces of carcasses. Bearded vulture pairs cover territories ranging from 100 to 400 square kilometers. The size of the territory is determined by the availability of food. The young are usually born when the spring thaw sets in, revealing the carcasses of animals that perished during the winter. By now, estimates put the number of breeding pairs at more than 50 a year. There are also around 40 young birds each year old enough to strike out on their own, making the bearded vulture reintroduction project a resounding success. One region in the Hohe Tauern National Park is particularly inaccessible. Surrounded by 25 peaks with an elevation higher than 3,000 meters, the area has been protected from human interference for thousands of years. The Sulzbachtal Valleys, home to 17 different glaciers, are now an internationally recognized, strictly protected IUCN wilderness area, which means that the natural world will remain completely untouched. The flora and fauna here is to develop naturally, free of any human intervention. At the foot of the glaciers, The ice that was once believed to be eternal has begun releasing the land from its icy grip. No human has ever set foot here before, but the pioneer plants are already establishing a claim. The first to arrive are plants that need little more than light and water to survive. After just a few years, the formerly barren surfaces are home to complex ecosystems. The wild landscape here is defined by stretches of snow and stone, alpine grasses and hardy shrubs, and a force of water. The ibex appear to value the remote character of the wilderness area. There are no tracks or signs that lead to this untouched natural paradise. The morning tranquility is interrupted by two young, high-spirited ibex. Austria is a country of natural wonders, nestled in vast, largely untouched landscapes. Groundbreaking management. Decisive, effective action. In-depth research. Conservation and care of sensitive fauna. Competent evaluation of extremes, cross-border cooperation, and the will to let nature thrive in its own terms, while listening carefully to its needs. These factors all contribute to the spectacular success of Austria's national parks, each one a jewel in its own right. Each park has its individual captivating characteristics in a setting all of its own. And yet, they all share a single goal: to preserve Austria's wild heritage.